I tightened my grip on the crystal wine glass, the chill from the liquid doing little to calm the heat rising in my chest. My name is Chloe Hayes, and at 32, I was a project director at a major commercial real estate firm in the city, something I had built from nothing. Tonight was the annual family Christmas party at my parents' suburban home, a sprawling ranch house they kept perpetually warm and brightly lit, masking the chill that often settled between us. The heavy scent of pine and cinnamon usually brought nostalgia, but this year it just felt suffocating. I had been dreading this dinner since the text message exchange with my mother earlier in the week, a vague, overly enthusiastic instruction to dress nicely because they had such exciting news. I should have known better. Owen, my 35-year-old brother, stood up from the mahogany table adjusting the cuffs of his expensive, yet somehow always rumpled shirt. He gave me a patronizing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, since we're all here," he began, his voice booming slightly over the gentle holiday jazz, "I have some great news that affects Chloe directly." He paused for dramatic effect, glancing at our parents who were beaming with anticipation. My father, Richard, raised his glass. My mother, Eleanor, gave a little clap. "Starting next week," Owen announced, "Mom and Dad promised I could move into your place. They said it's temporary, just until I figure things out and save some cash." The collective sigh of relief from my parents was deafening. Owen looked at me, expecting either compliance or perhaps a manufactured display of sisterly joy. I slowly lowered my soup spoon, careful not to spill a drop of the bisque onto the festive white tablecloth. I met his gaze, my expression utterly flat. "That's awkward," I replied, my voice calm, almost a murmur against the celebratory noise. "I sold the luxury condo last week to a single mother." The silent tension in the room thickened, but my story doesn't end with a broken wine glass or an angry walkout. It ends with a legal reckoning that changed my family forever. Before we continue, I want to know how far my story has traveled. Take a second to tell me what time it is, and what city you're watching from right now, so I can see how far my story has spread. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and leave a comment below to support others facing similar family conflicts. The air in the family dining room turned cold and still as a morgue within those few seconds. The gentle jazz music now seemed painfully loud and inappropriate for the scene. My mother, Eleanor, was the first to react, her smile instantly melting into a look of betrayal. "You what? Chloe?" She hissed, her eyes darting between me and the empty spot where Owen should have been sitting next to me. Owen, utterly blindsided, remained frozen, the confident smirk having vanished completely. My father, Richard, slammed his champagne flute down, the crystal ringing with aggression. "What kind of cruel joke is this, Chloe? It's Christmas." He used the holiday as a moral shield, instantly framing my action as a personal attack against the spirit of togetherness, ignoring the fact that they had planned a unilateral takeover of my home. "It's not a joke, Dad," I stated clearly, pulling a small embossed legal folder from my purse which had been resting on the floor beside my seat. I slid the top sheet across the tablecloth. "This is the executed purchase and sale agreement. Closing is set for mid-January. I closed the deal last Friday." The details of the document were starkly laid out: the sale price, the buyer's name, Ms. Diana Torres, a single mother needing a fresh start, and the firm handling the transfer. I didn't need to explain the buyer's circumstances, but I felt it was necessary to contrast her genuine need with Owen's entitled expectation. I watched as the color drained from Owen's face. He knew his comfortable landing spot had evaporated. He had been counting on a year or two of rent-free living in my luxurious two-bedroom condo overlooking the park, the very place I had worked tirelessly for years to secure. I had purchased that place not just as an investment, but as a sanctuary, a place where I made the rules, and where I was finally independent of their constant influence. "You did this on purpose," Owen accused, finding his voice, which was now trembling with a mixture of anger and self-pity. You knew I needed a place to regroup, and you threw it away just to spite me. I kept my composure, refusing to let his gaslighting technique take root. Owen, you have an apartment lease in Brooklyn, I corrected him calmly. It's just that you stopped paying for it 3 months ago, forcing Mom and Dad to cover the deficit yet again. This hit a nerve with my parents, whose faces tightened. This was a truth they preferred to keep buried, a part of the unspoken ledger that tracked Owen's chronic financial irresponsibility against my decade of self-sufficiency. The real reason I had to sell, I continued pushing past their collective glare, is that I needed liquidity fast. You remember that investment fund I put all my emergency savings into 2 years ago? Richard nodded curtly. Well, that fund lost a significant amount of capital, largely because you convinced me it was a sure thing, and then pulled your own funds out at the last minute, leaving me to absorb the majority of the subsequent market crash. This was the core of my hidden financial pressure, a massive 6-figure loss I had been shouldering silently. It wasn't roof leaks that drove me out. It was a devastating financial blow caused indirectly by Owen's negligence and my misplaced trust in his business acumen. Richard suddenly stood up, towering over me, his hand clenched into a fist on the table. You can cancel the sale, he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. Tell this woman you changed your mind. These things have clauses. I can call the title company first thing Monday morning and straighten this out. Eleanor jumped in, her voice now escalating to a desperate plea. Chloe, darling, your brother needs stability. This is what family does. You have to help him. We promise to pay you back for anything you need. The promise felt empty, a familiar debt that would never be settled. No, I can't cancel it, I insisted, my voice not wavering. And not just because I took the single mother's money. I need the proceeds from that sale to pay off the massive second mortgage I took out 5 months ago to cover that investment loss and prevent total financial ruin. I watched as Richard's jaw muscles pulsed. He realized this wasn't about spite. It was about survival. He was losing his leverage over me and losing the resource he needed for his favorite son. I can see you're determined to be difficult, Richard growled, leaning close to me, his breath smelling of expensive holiday scotch. I have contacts, Chloe, important contacts in the city's real estate sector. If you insist on this rash and selfish decision, I will make sure the title company, the buyer's lawyer, and even your own firm know about your reckless financial history. I will call your manager and clarify your financial stability and your temperament. I can promise you I will make sure the closing process becomes very difficult for you. I will make sure everyone knows about your instability. His threat was subtle but chillingly effective. He would use his influence to potentially jeopardize my career and the crucial finalization of the sale. The tense silence that followed Richard's veiled threat at the dining table was only broken by the abrupt cessation of the Christmas jazz. Richard and Eleanor left the table in unison, taking Owen with them, leaving me alone with the remnants of the fractured holiday meal. I stayed there for 20 minutes, gathering my thoughts and the scattered papers, the realization settling in that I hadn't just announced a sale, I had declared war. I fully expected the silent treatment, but what I received the next morning was far more toxic. I woke up not to a call or text, but to the first volley of the Hayes family's coordinated public shaming campaign. My phone screen was flooded with notifications. I had been tagged in a lengthy, tearful post on Facebook by Owen. The title was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive martyrdom, when you learn who truly has your back. He painted a picture of himself as a victim of sudden, cruel abandonment by his own sister. He omitted the part about the massive losses he caused me, the years of dependence, and the fact that he was supposed to be moving into my home without my permission. He only emphasized his imminent homelessness in the middle of a cruel New York winter. Eleanor and my Aunt Meredith, who was usually quiet but always aligned with Owen, were quick to comment. "We are praying for you, sweetie," my mother wrote, adding an emoji of a broken heart. Meredith wrote a lengthy sermon about the unbreakable bonds of family and the importance of generosity. I also found that my colleague Lisa had texted me. "Hey, Chloe saw Owen's post. That's rough. If you need any contacts for temporary shelter for him, my church runs a program." The insidious nature of the lie had already begun to spread into my professional life. It was one thing for my parents to call me selfish. It was another entirely for my professional contacts to believe I was heartlessly rendering my own brother destitute. I immediately drafted a neutral, professional-sounding response to my colleagues, stating the sale was a pre-planned, necessary financial decision, and that Owen was currently still housed in his leased apartment, but the damage was done. The situation worsened when I opened a text chain from my mother to Aunt Meredith, one she had clearly meant to send to me, but mistakenly included me in the group message. It was a photo of my condo's living room taken during her last visit, overlaid with crude sketches of furniture arrangement. The message read, "We need to move quickly, Meredith. Before the realtors arrive, I don't want to break our promise. Owen needs that space. And honestly, Chloe's house has always been too big for just one person." The text confirmed my worst fear. They hadn't just planned for him to stay. They had already begun mentally taking ownership of my private property. They had viewed my home not as my sanctuary, but as a temporary interchangeable resource for their favored son. I immediately sent a screenshot of the message thread to my lawyer. Then a more direct threat materialized. The email came from the buyer's lawyer late that afternoon. The subject line was chilling: inquiry regarding property condition and Hayes family dispute. The buyer, Diana Torres, had received an anonymous phone call detailing supposed undisclosed structural issues with the condo and mentioning the high-profile family dispute involving a brother who was being evicted. The caller, the lawyer noted, had a deep, recognizable male voice. The implication was clear: Richard was following through on his threat to sabotage the sale. He wasn't just threatening my reputation, he was actively attempting to ruin a legally binding contract, risking a massive lawsuit and my financial ruin, simply to force me to keep the house available for Owen. The sheer audacity and malice behind the act, especially targeting a single mother who was eagerly awaiting the closing, pushed me past anger and into a state of cold, absolute resolve. I knew then that this was no longer a family disagreement. It was an all-out zero-sum battle for my independence and financial survival. The line had been crossed. My family had chosen to prioritize Owen's convenience over my financial security and basic legal rights. I decided I would no longer engage with their emotional blackmail. It was time to speak the only language they truly understood: financial liability. 2 days after Richard's attempt to sabotage the sale, I arranged a direct meeting with Owen at a neutral coffee shop downtown, choosing a public setting to discourage any dramatic outbursts. I needed to cut through his victim narrative with facts. "Owen." I began placing a thick manila envelope labeled Hayes Family Debt File on the table between us. "This meeting isn't about where you're going to live. It's about why I had to sell." He scoffed, crossing his arms. "Still playing the martyr, Chloe? I told everyone you're using this sale just to abandon me." I opened the folder, ignoring his accusation. "Do you remember the angel investor group fund you convinced me to put my life savings into 2 years ago?" I asked, pushing a thick stack of bank statements and trading confirmations toward him. The papers documented my initial investment of nearly $150,000 and the devastating subsequent loss. "You pitched it to me as a guaranteed 20% return, convincing me to empty my emergency fund. You swore you'd be in it with me. Then 2 days before the catastrophic market correction, you liquidated your entire position." I slid the proof of his transaction across the table. His expression shifted instantly from entitled indignation to one of guilt and defensiveness. "That's not fair, Chloe. I just read the market better than you did. That's business." "No. That's insider trading, or at the very least, a flagrant disregard for your own sister's financial well-being." I corrected him, maintaining a steady, low tone. Because of that loss and the need to protect my credit and career, I was forced to take out a second mortgage of $70,000 on the condo just to cover the shortfall and the subsequent penalties. That second mortgage, combined with the rising HOA fees, made the property unsustainable for me. Selling was the only way to avoid foreclosure and total financial ruin. I watched the realization of the scale of my sacrifice slowly dawn on him, although his first instinct was still denial. "Mom and Dad would have helped you," he stammered, looking around the coffee shop nervously. "They always help." "They always help you?" I countered softly. "I didn't ask them because I refused to be another liability on their ledger, just like I refused to be a constant financial bailout for you." I then pushed a copy of the second half of the debt file across the table, a meticulous itemized ledger documenting every single financial transaction my parents had made on Owen's behalf over the past 10 years. Rent supplements, car lease payments, credit card debt consolidation, and even funds for his various startup failures. The total was circled dramatically in bright red over $325,000. He stared at the number, momentarily speechless. "This is dependency, Owen. It's not love. And when I needed help, I got a threat to ruin my career and a lawsuit from the man I trusted most." This was the moment I set the irreversible boundary. "I'm selling the condo. The deal is final. The proceeds go toward paying my second mortgage and rebuilding my savings. You have 30 days to secure your own living arrangements." As I stood up to leave, he finally snapped, "You know what, Chloe? That condo was supposed to be mine someday. Dad promised me when I was a kid. You just took it and ran. I'm going to sue you. I'll tie up the sale in court for months until you cave in and give me what's mine by right." He was claiming the condo based on a vague childhood promise and a delusion of inheritance. I simply looked at him. "Do what you feel you must, Owen. But you should know I have already started collecting my evidence." I turned and left the thick file folder remaining on the table. My condo had begun its transformation, no longer a home, but a meticulously organized storage unit. Every room was lined with boxes, each labeled with surgical precision. 2 days after my confrontation with Owen, I was in damage control mode, dealing with the fallout of Richard's attempted sabotage. The buyer, Diana Torres, was understandably nervous. I spent 2 hours on the phone with her lawyer, providing signed affidavits and documentation, proving the condo's structural integrity and confirming the family dispute had no legal bearing on the sale. I had to put $5,000 of my own cash into escrow as additional assurance to calm the buyer's fears. I was determined to protect that single mother's investment, seeing her as an innocent party caught in my family's crossfire. I also began finalizing the details for my own move. I secured a sleek industrial loft rental downtown, the monthly payment for which was nearly 40% less than my former mortgage and HOA combined. This wasn't just a move, it was a radical shift toward financial lightness. That evening, I met with my personal support team, Anna, my oldest friend from college, and Mitchell, my trusted financial advisor. We gathered around a takeout container of pad thai in the half-empty living room, using a cardboard box as a makeshift table. "They think they can bully you into submission," Mitchell commented dryly, reviewing the debt file I had shown Owen. "Richard's threat to call your firm is serious, but we can counter it. We'll preemptively inform your firm's general counsel about the family dispute, framing it as a false flag attack to undermine your financial independence." Anna squeezed my shoulder, her silent presence a monumental comfort. "I'm proud of you for walking away from that money pit, Chloe. That house was their leash, not your home." My team's objective wasn't just to help me move, it was to fortify me for the inevitable next clash. That clash came sooner than expected. The doorbell rang, and standing on my porch was Back Warren, my father's highly respected older brother and a successful corporate lawyer in his own right. He looked stern, holding a folder identical to mine. "Richard insisted I come." Back Warren stated, his tone neutral. "He wants me to mediate and talk some sense into you. He thinks I can convince you to take a loan from him instead of selling. I invited him in, and Back Warren sat at the kitchen table, which was covered in moving blankets. I presented him with the entire case, the investment loss, the second mortgage, and the $300,000 of subsidies to Owen. He spent nearly an hour reading every document, his forehead deeply furrowed. When he finally looked up, his expression was a mix of disappointment and anger directed squarely at my parents, not me. Richard is operating from a place of fear, Back Warren observed, shaking his head. He's terrified of Owen failing, and he's more terrified of admitting he created this mess. Your sale forces him to face the truth. He looked at me, a rare spark of respect in his eyes. I will not mediate for Richard, Chloe. I will attend your next family meeting as an impartial witness to ensure facts, not emotion, drive the conversation. Back Warren's agreement to support me was the biggest shift in the family power dynamic yet. It severed the united front my parents depended on. Later that night, as I was bubble wrapping a priceless antique lamp, the final piece of the week's drama arrived: a certified letter from Richard's lawyer. It was not a lawsuit yet, but an official request for mandatory family mediation, citing my impulsive financial decisions and the risk of rendering a family member homeless as grounds. The letter was a formal attempt to drag me back to the negotiation table under threat of legal action. I placed the letter on the counter and took a deep breath. Mediation was just another ambush, but this time I wouldn't go in alone. I had Back Warren Mitchell and the undeniable truth on my side. The following Tuesday, my newly leased loft served as the unlikely venue for our formal family reckoning. It was sparsely furnished, its high ceilings and concrete floors amplifying every nervous cough and shifting chair. I had insisted on the neutral territory of my new space, removing any sense of my parents having control. Seated around a borrowed folding table were Richard and Eleanor, looking grim and defensive, and Owen, who wore a suit that was clearly meant to project competence but only emphasized his anxiety. Across from them sat my chosen witnesses, Back Warren maintaining a professional distance and holding his briefcase like a shield, and Mitchell, my financial advisor, looking calm and prepared. The atmosphere was less about reconciliation and more about the legal dismantling of a toxic dynamic. Thank you all for coming. I began, my voice steady, opening a crisp new manila folder. This isn't mediation as my parents' letter suggested. This is an information session to clearly explain why my personal financial decisions are irreversible and necessary. I immediately pushed a thick document package toward Back Warren and Mitchell, completely bypassing my parents. The condo sale is final. The only thing left to discuss is the pattern of financial abuse that led to it. I started with a summary: my life savings, the $150,000 loss caused by Owen's advice, and withdrawal, the forced $70,000 second mortgage, and my necessary pivot to a low-cost, high-liquidity life. Mitchell then took the floor, his tone clinical and objective. As Chloe's fiduciary advisor, my recommendation to sell was based on a severe, unexpected capital deficit. Furthermore, he continued sliding the itemized debt file across the table. I compiled this analysis showing that in the last decade, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes have transferred $325,000 in subsidies to Owen, creating a clear and documented case of financial dependency. Eleanor gasped softly, staring at the number. She had never seen the total laid out so starkly. She had only dealt with one small, temporary crisis payment at a time. I took over again, presenting the series of screenshots, emails, and phone records that proved Richard's attempted interference with the condo sale. This is not love or help, Dad, I stated, looking directly at Richard. This is financial coercion and boundary violation. Richard's face was dark, but he remained silent under the watchful eyes of Back Warren. It was Back Warren who finally spoke, his deep voice carrying the weight of authority. Richard, Eleanor, This file clearly illustrates not only Chloe's necessity to sell, but also the long-term destructive pattern of favoritism and enabling. You have treated Owen as a perennial client whose problems you must solve, and Chloe as a resource you can simply redirect. This dynamic is financially and emotionally harmful to both your children. Owen, hearing the word enabling, leaped from his chair, his composure finally breaking. Harmful, I'm the one who's about to be homeless. You're the successful one, you old lawyer sitting here judging us. He lunged toward back Warren, but Richard quickly pulled him back, grappling with his son. Sit down, Owen, enough. Richard roared, his own shame bubbling over into anger toward Owen. This public display of aggression and instability completely validated my narrative and Mitchell's analysis. Back Warren waited until the physical struggle subsided before delivering the final crushing blow. I will be sending a letter to Richard's business associates tomorrow, Back Warren announced calmly. I will be withdrawing my firm's minor investment from his real estate development fund. I do not associate professionally with individuals who attempt to sabotage legal property transactions or misuse their corporate influence to address family disputes. The betrayal from his own brother, the loss of reputation and funds, was a powerful, immediate consequence. Richard's face went white. The trial ended not with a resolution, but with Owen storming out, followed by Eleanor in tears, and Richard defeated, simply collecting the debt file and walking out without a word. The emotional silence after my family's departure was profound, but the real-world consequences only began to unfold over the following 2 weeks. The immediate blow landed on Richard. Back Warren was true to his word. Within 48 hours, Richard lost a critical backing investor from one of his major property development funds, citing ethical concerns, following Back Warren's withdrawal. The ripple effect was devastating, costing Richard significantly more than the condo's sale price. The financial stability he had always used as leverage was now visibly cracking. Meanwhile, Owen followed through on his threat. A week after the disastrous meeting, my lawyer received notification Owen Hayes had officially filed a lawsuit against Chloe Hayes. The claim was nonsensical, citing breach of verbal inheritance contract and demanding a portion of the condo sale proceeds based on the vague childhood promise. It was a clear abuse of the legal system designed purely to tie up the funds and create maximum stress. I didn't panic. The documentation Mitchell and I had prepared was ironclad. My lawyer immediately filed a motion for summary dismissal and requested sanctions against Owen for filing a frivolous lawsuit. The legal fees were mounting rapidly, yet I felt a strange sense of clarity. This was the final expense required for my freedom. My parents' last attempt to control me came not in person, but through a series of increasingly frantic and tearful voicemails from Eleanor, interspersed with cold, manipulative emails from Richard. Eleanor begged me to drop the charges referring to the counter-sanctions and pay Owen's mounting legal fees, claiming he was too fragile to handle the stress. Richard's email was colder, offering a final, non-negotiable settlement of $50,000 in exchange for dropping the sanction requests and giving Owen a 6-month rent subsidy. I rejected both offers. I drafted a comprehensive, unemotional, and final statement. It was a detailed, no-contact letter addressed to Eleanor and Richard, outlining the specific boundaries they had crossed. Financial coercion, attempted sabotage of a legal contract, public defamation, and, finally, the frivolous lawsuit. I formally informed them that due to their sustained pattern of destructive behavior and their continued prioritization of Owen's dependency over my well-being, I was initiating a permanent period of no contact. I specified that all future communication must go through my legal representative and that I would only respond to inquiries directly related to the lawsuit. It was a declaration of emotional and financial divorce from my own family. The letter was sent via certified mail on a quiet Tuesday morning. I felt a massive weight lift from my shoulders, an ache I hadn't realized I'd been carrying since childhood. The emotional ledger was finally balanced not with debt, but with absolute separation. The legal system confirmed my freedom shortly thereafter. My lawyer called with the news. Tom Fawn Miller, Judge Miller, known for her no-nonsense approach to frivolous litigation, had granted the motion for summary dismissal of Owen's case. She didn't stop there. Judge Miller ordered Owen to pay a substantial portion of my legal fees, citing his action as a clear case of legal system abuse driven by a personal dispute. The finality of the ruling felt monumental. It was not just a legal victory, but a public validation that my actions were right and necessary. 6 months later, I stood in my new downtown loft, the scent of fresh paint and possibility filling the air. The vast window overlooked the vibrant, independent cityscape, a sharp contrast to the suffocating quiet of my former suburban condo. I was officially free. The final cost of my liberation was steep: the substantial financial loss from Owen's failed investment, a few $1,000s in unexpected escrow and legal fees, and the permanent severance of my relationship with my immediate family. But the emotional gain was priceless. Owen's frivolous lawsuit and the subsequent sanctions ordered by Judge Miller put an enormous strain on Richard and Eleanor. Instead of allowing Owen to face the court-ordered consequences, Richard covered the majority of the legal penalty, further depleting his already damaged funds. The financial consequences Warren initiated were realized in full. Richard was forced to sell a small family property to cover the loss of the development fund investor. Eleanor and Richard were left with a crushing financial burden and an adult son who was more entitled and less capable than ever. They created a dependent, and in the end, that dependency became their downfall. They taught Owen that responsibility was optional and consequences could always be bought off. I, on the other hand, had taught myself that boundaries are not cruel, they are self-love. I had rebuilt my emergency fund, now larger than ever, and my career continued to thrive, unburdened by the external sabotage. I now invested only with highly vetted independent firms. My freedom was not an accident. It was a deliberate, documented, and fiercely defended choice. I had found happiness not in a specific place or with specific people, but in the unwavering peace of financial and emotional integrity. The final piece of closure came unexpectedly through an email. It was from Diana Torres, the single mother who bought my condo. She sent a picture of her son in his new brightly decorated room. Her message read, "Thank you, Chloe. We are so happy here. You gave us a chance to start over." Her thanks was the true reward, a validation that my difficult decision had not only saved myself, but had also genuinely helped another person in need, unlike the false help my family constantly offered Owen. This is the true value I learned. The hardest and most necessary act of self-preservation is to cut the ropes that tether you to a sinking ship, even if those ropes are labeled family. Financial stability is not about how much money you have, but about having the freedom to say no to anyone who attempts to compromise your well-being. Never let anyone, especially family, define your worth or your resources. Your integrity is your most valuable asset. Protect it at all costs. If my story of setting boundaries against a toxic family dynamic resonated with you, hit the like button and share your own experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to follow my journey toward complete independence.